So I'll need some help. Are we getting audio from Julian Assange? So Julian, just a moment. We are working on technical difficulties. We see you, looking dapper as always. It must be a Swedish thing, y'all. So we're not hearing you.
You say Swedish?
Yeah.
You hear me?
He's Australian.
Yes. So, Julian, I hope that we will get the technical difficulties solved quickly. I know that the NSA works hard to silence your voice, but we've got green technical folks working on our end. I know you do as well. So we are semi-patiently waiting for the audio feed. You can applaud now.
WIKI LEAKS.
I am again looking. Julian Assange, are you now with us? I'm going to ask.
They can hear on YouTube, though. I'm getting that.
So the good news is that you can be heard on YouTube, Julian. So what I'm going to do, those people watching the live stream, if you would just like to say a word or two there,
Link this to YouTube.
so that we will do that. I will step away to our folks.
Your microphone's not working.
Mic died.
We can't hear him. We can't hear him. What the hell?
Yes.
Hear him.
Envy.
Julian, Greens, like most Americans, are losing public trust in the rule of law and the integrity of our own election process. Thanks to WIKI LEAKS, we now know that our suspicions are in fact well-founded. A particularly egregious example is the evidence that the Democratic National Committee colluded to undermine and delegitimize the Bernie Sanders campaign. Can you talk about that and what lessons can be learned going forward?
Yes, I can. So we published 20,000 phishing emails from DNC, from Debbie Wasserman Schultz, from the Communications Director, Miranda, from the Chief Financial Officer, and so on. And also communications and to the Hillary Clinton campaign and a number of other groups. What they show is not only was there a sort of internal view or discussions about how to undermine Bernie Sanders and support Hillary Clinton. Not surprising, given that Debbie Wasserman Schultz used to work for Hillary Clinton's campaign. But rather, there were formal instructions made to DNC staff to execute a campaign of black propaganda against Bernie Sanders. For example, Louis Miranda, the communications chief, instructed his staff to put out, in a quote, unattributable manner, allegations that Bernie Sanders supporters were engaged in acts of violence. Similarly, there was discussion to expose, or rather claim, that Bernie Sanders was an atheist and that this would harm him in the South. To use his religious beliefs, or rather his lack of religious beliefs, against him. So then there's aspects to do with how financing was being bounced around between the DNC and the state parties and the the Hillary Clinton Victory Fund. To my mind, I think the most ongoing interesting material, which has been picked up now by a wide range of state-based investigative journalists in the US, is the influence peddling structure of the DNC. Who goes to what private conventions at particular people's houses with Barack Obama or with the Vice President, Joseph Biden, and the sort of some of the things that they get into get in exchange, for example, being put on federal government boards and commissions.
And of course, let's just acknowledge that the corporate media spent their entire time saying there is no collusion, it's all above board, absolute ridiculous on the part of the Sanders campaign and their supporters, and on a dime they switched their narrative to, of course that was happening, everybody knew it, they're just crazy people. So the collusion of the Democratic National Committee and the corporate media is important to acknowledge.
Comes out. Which is, I didn't mention it because as someone who's having to deal with the media all the time, I understand how real this is. The general public, it is proof of something important, which is the direct connections between the Hillary Clinton faction on the DNC and the president of MSNBC. For example, Betty Wasserman-Schultz called up the president of NBC in order to haul Morning Joe into line because they were speaking about the bias of the DNC. Talking points were constructed for Jake Tapper, for example, on CNN. Of course, we don't know whether he was willing to use them. He has denied that, but at least from the DNC end, they constructed the questions that he was to ask. Even saying, watching coverage live, and calling up the networks to say, no, put a stop to that chain of communication right now.
Julian, Greens, like most Americans, are grateful for people and organizations that inform and expose illegal or illicit activity on the part of government. That is the very definition of a whistleblower, blowing the whistle on crime. And yet the U.S. government under President Obama and Secretary of State Clinton has prosecuted more whistleblowers than all past presidents combined and sought and obtained longer jail sentences than previous presidents. Why do you think that is true, and what lessons can be learned there?
Well, I'm afraid it's much worse than that. The Obama administration has gone after more whistleblowers using the Espionage Act, not only than all previous presidents combined back to 1917, when the act was first passed in World War I to deal with World War I spies, but in fact now 3 times as many. So this is really an epidemic to abuse the national security law in order to stop whistleblowers and journalists and publishers. So the attempted prosecution, the pending prosecution of WIKI LEAKS in the United States, used the Espionage Act, used Computer Terrorism Act, etc., etc. But the same act, the 1917 Espionage Act, was used to go after and obtain subpoenas in relation to Fox News reporting on information allegedly obtained from the State Department. Similarly, going after Associated Press's telephone call records. So it's there's a galloping epidemic of abuse of national security law under this Democratic administration, which Hillary Clinton was part of. She and Obama were involved in placing one of my alleged sources, Chelsea Manning, into prison for 35 years, only for communicating truthful information to the public. There's no other allegation. No allegation about working with spies or anything like that. Just communicating truthful information to the press and to the public. That situation is so bad that Chelsea Manning was tortured in prison, a formal finding of the UN, even a finding by the US military justice system that illegal punishments occurred during prison. And just a week and a half ago, unfortunately, she attempted suicide because of the difficulty in the conditions.
I'm reminded of the great political philosopher Lily Tomlin, who said, "No matter how cynical I get, it's hard to keep up." Julian, Greens, like most Americans, are disgusted by the collusion between Wall Street multinational corporations and our own government. We know, as most Americans do, that these large corporations are no longer merely exercising power. They are literally ruling over us. In your book, When Google Met WIKI Leaks, you describe, quote, a special relationship, end quote, between Google, the U.S. State Department, and Hillary Clinton. Could you talk about that, please?
Well, I just want to correct very quickly some false reporting. Very interestingly, when we published the DNC leaks, the New York Times, which has picked its favorite candidate, as has Bloomberg, which is Hillary Clinton, said that I intended to harm Hillary Clinton. This is what we've been doing for 10 years. It was a completely fabricated story by Charles Savage. Okay, but yes, we are very interested in power and publishing the truth about power so people can work out, however they choose, to reform power. And so Google is a kind of new power on the block, so we're interested in it, and we're also interested in Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of State, and now, presidential candidacy. So these two powers have merged at a kind of personal level, a political level, and even to a small extent at the organizational level. So that book written 3 years ago has been proved to be very prescient. The chairman of Google, who was the CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt, has started about a year ago a company to run Hillary Clinton's digital campaign. Google has attended the White House on average over the last 4 years, once per week, more than any other single company. It spends more money lobbying Washington, D.C. than any other single company. Hillary Clinton's former staffer, Jared Cohen, was hired by Google in 2009 to head up Google's internal think tank. There's a lot of other interconnections between Google and the state. Eric Schmidt is now also, at the same time as being chairman of what is now Google's parent company, Alphabet, is chairman of the Pentagon Innovation Board. So you have a connection between Google, the Clinton campaign, which will be almost certainly the next White House, and the Pentagon. And this triangle is extremely worrying because as time goes by, Google's understanding that it does have an ability to influence election campaigns. It's also bought more than 10 drone companies. It's integrating its mapping data in order to better be able to fly and navigate drones around the world, as expanding into every country in the world. And it has a very strange quasi-religious vision of the future, of this vision of the singularity. It's really, go and research that, it's very disturbing what they believe in Silicon Valley, but they believe they can create a massive artificial intelligence more powerful than any human being or any society's ability to think. And of course we all know what happens when such power is in limited hands. Right. And so Google in the White House will be essentially an unregulatable company. It's a question whether it's already unregulatable, but you can just completely forget about any kind of antitrust legislation being used on Google if there is a Hillary Clinton White House.
Julian, I'm reminded that Benito Mussolini, the fascist dictator, said that fascism, more appropriately, should be called corporatism because it merges the private power of corporations with the military might of the nation state. And of course, he thought that was a good thing. It occurs to me that you were describing our newer, kinder, gentler, smiling face of fascism, where all of the information that we receive is controlled by that same collusion between government and major transnational corporations, and now our ability to even talk to myself or ourselves. Am I being overdramatic, or do I understand you correctly?
Well, it could be both. No, it is possibly the most serious issue. The potential threat of nuclear war, I think, is perhaps the other one. Yes, there is a merger going on at a rapid pace between the largest American corporations and the traditional aspects of the US state, the military intelligence aspects. I mean, that's been there for a long time, frankly. Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, General Electric, etc. But this is a new generation, and Eric Schmidt wrote in his book about Google and the world that what Lockheed Martin and other aerospace companies were to the 20th century, high-tech companies will be to the 21st century. And that's very much their vision, to integrate with Washington to prevent antitrust regulation and to be part of that family of traditional DC-mediated power.
Julian, Greens, like most Americans, have been horrified to learn, and for many of us have it objectively corroborated, that multinational corporations and wealthy oligarchs are literally directing U.S. foreign policy. So I have a question for you because of your unique vantage point. What advice, if any, would you give the next President of the United States about how to shift that policy given the reality that she might be facing?
That's a very interesting question. Does it make any difference who is president or not? A very, very interesting question. It certainly doesn't make as much difference as people say. What really makes a difference is what the environment is in which the president has to work. And that is the environment of critique, on the one hand, so how free the media is, how much opposition organisations are doing their job in holding government to account. And it's the economic and corporate environment. And then, to a degree, the international foreign affairs environment. And the president is much more a spokesperson for these forces around him. Where they do make a big difference is in their initial appointments. So the people that they choose to fill those slots in government that then reactively makes policy. But as you can see with Barack Obama, most of the time is spent reading out teleprompters. There's just not enough time to do much else and be a spokesperson for these groups. So what is happening now with the Green Party and Gary Johnson and the Bernie Sanders campaign and so on is very, very important, but it must be seen past the moment, past this political moment. That's a moment to build a movement and build pressure. And having built it, then one can discipline and hold to account and check the abuses of government during the next 4 years.
Julian, and those of you watching, I just will share that Jill Stein was taking copious notes during your answer.
It is a remarkable moment in US politics. For the Greens, the Greens, if they pursue this campaign, as they do seem to be doing so, can, and I believe probably will, produce a very solid bloc after. And I think that's really heartening. It's a horrific vision. I mean, who's going to be US president, next US president, is a horrific vision. I was asked this question, did I prefer Clinton or Trump? And I mean, the answer is, well, you're asking, do I prefer cholera or gonorrhea?
Yeah.
It's a very sad situation, but I think, given the reality has always been that presidency pretty quickly merges with the bureaucracy that is around it. Because bureaucracy is enormous, and the corporate lobbyists are enormous compared to the political parties. It actually it could be a net positive to have a president, either in the form of Hillary or Trump. Probably, who knows? You never know what happens in the campaign. Maybe Jill Stein will be president, maybe. No, I'm serious. You never know. Like who knows what happens in the campaign? Anything's possible. You have to be ready for that. But if it is Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, then that's a very adverse environment. But the nature of those presidents, I like things to look like what they are. I think Hillary Clinton, in her statements, demeanour, and associations and track record, looks like the power that she actually does represent. Similarly, with Donald Trump, maybe even Donald Trump even looks more like what the power will end up representing than he does actually represent it. But that's a situation that generates resistance and accountability, and that is what really checks the behaviour of government over time. It is the various pressures that exist on the presidency. That's what checks their behaviour. So these are two characters that are the most unpopular pair of presidential candidates in US history. And going into the presidency, they are going to continue to generate oversight and resistance, which will not only create a fertile field for Gary Johnson and Jill Stein to grow their support, but will create a very fertile field to understand and hold government to account.
So take a note, Greens and Americans everywhere, it is social movements that will actually bring corporate America to heel. Greens.
That's right, and a few whistleblowers. I'm here in Ecuador, in the United Kingdom, with people thinking U.S. prosecution. It's very I think it's creature. But the Corbyn phenomenon in the UK really does show that something important, very important, is happening. There is a political moment in the English-speaking world that the Greens should, and it looks like are, seizing upon. It's a very important moment.
I do think that North Americans need to have a little more humility as we look to our sisters and brothers in the global South who have been fighting empire for 500 years. They have a more acute understanding of actually social movements and electoral arm of their social movements. So we should be humble and learn that lesson. Julian, Greens, like most Americans, are civil libertarians at heart. We believe in personal privacy. We believe in internet freedom, even as we call for complete public transparency and accountability. My question to you is, what can we do as individuals to protect ourselves, and what can we do to help build the movement for keeping the internet free and open so we, the people, can talk to ourselves?
All right, great question. Well, first of all, have coherency in your own movement. I mean, you have to have coherency to be able to understand your own view of the world and the attacks that are occurring, which, let me tell you that I've just seen that the attacks have started to ramp up on Jill Stein. They are going to go through the roof. I've had attacks from what is effectively the Clinton bird machine. They're now post-convention. You guys are going to be post-convention. Those attacks are going to be ferocious. But you'll see from that and learn lessons from that about how the media works and how one can defend your principles and ideas in the face of that kind of media crush. So to defend civil liberties and the internet, the first thing is to practice it. That's the number one thing. That's what we do. We defend the First Amendment and similar constitutional amendments in other states by practicing them. We've won every single court case that we have been involved in over the last 10 years. And that any right that is not fought for through practice and defence is very, very quickly lost. It is just a piece of paper unless you actually fight for it and practice for it. Then there's a range of technical measures and some good people, researchers, trying to push out those technical measures. WIKI LEAKS tweets about that, Edward Snowden tweets about what some of those technical measures are. I support those people who are engaged in trying to engineer, in a practical sense, how to protect people's privacy. And the other is to support the various groups that are doing it and to build the ideological understanding that it is an important thing. Because let's go back and look at Google. Google is very different in an important way from Lockheed Martin. Yes, Google is building drones. Yes, Lockheed Martin was and is building F-16s. But Google also controls how we communicate with each other. So Google is, in a sense, like HIV. It's not just something that afflicts your arm. It afflicts your ability to understand and fight the infection. That's true of all media, libraries, communication services, etc. They're involved in that part of society that we use to understand ourselves, and that is the freedom of communication. So the freedom of communication, in some sense, is the fundamental right, because it is the enabling right that allows us to speak to each other, to understand the importance of all our other rights. And so when the freedom of communication is degraded or maligned, when whistleblowers are prosecuted, when one organisation starts to develop a monopoly on the internet and interfere with our communication, then all our rights suffer, because this fundamental enabling right is degraded.
And I will take this opportunity to acknowledge that both for the Green Party and every social movement that is moving, the Black Lives Matter, Occupy Wall Street, the climate justice movement, Move to Amend, the call to abolish the prison industrial complex, corporate media is either lying or ignoring such movement, but it's people's media, citizen journalists who are in the House right now, who are telling the story. They too are heroes of this movement and heroes of this movement. Julian Assange, we are nearing our end, so I will invite you to share any last thoughts that you would like to share, not only with Greens assembled at this convention, but with the literally tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people who are watching and participating and learning from you. So final thoughts that you'd like to share with us, please.
What's the smoking gun?
As the editor of WIKI LEAKS, I have gone through a lot of battles. I have seen corrupt mainstream media outlets try to not report initially on some of our materials, spin them in other directions. That's happened just recently. And I have also seen good journalists embedded in those institutions fighting to be accurate and truthful. There are good people, even in bad institutions. Most of our sources are good people wanting to do good things within the US military or the intelligence or political parties. So my strong advice is to understand, first of all, the necessity to be very skeptical of the traditional media apparatus, which is ultimately owned by some of the largest industrial conglomerates in the world, strongly connected to other points of power. Work around it. Become your own media in practice, in small ways, in big ways, to keep your principles and sense of clarity on principles. What the Clinton campaign is doing at the moment is trying to say well, okay, yes, maybe we're connected to arms dealers and to Saudi Arabia, and yes, maybe we subverted the integrity of the democratic primaries, etc., etc. But you'll just have to swallow that. Right. You'll just have to swallow that, or else you'll get Donald Trump. That's a form of extortion. You can't admit. It's very important not to allow the political process to suffer from extortion, or even yourself to be susceptible to extortion. That one says one has certain principles. If these principles are not followed, then there is a price to be paid. And that creates a standard and a general deterrent. And I think it is important for those people who feel that their principles have been violated in the way that the democratic primary process has been run, or how Chelsea Manning has been imprisoned for 35 years and tortured, or Espionage Act crackdowns, or many other things, to go, okay, well, there's a cost to violating principles, even if there's also a cost to yourself, even if you don't like the risk, which seems to be getting very small, but the risk that Donald Trump becomes president, that one has to have a line somewhere. Otherwise, as each election cycle proceeds, you are pushed further and further into the corner.
Mi hermanos in the South have taught me a phrase that I have learned to use more and more. Ya basta. Enough already. Julian Assange. Yeah!